Mike Mentzer wasn't just another bodybuilder chasing trophies. He was a prodigy who walked into the sport with a mind sharper than his physique. He questioned the rules everyone else followed, shattered the ones he didn't like, and created a system so radical it threatened to change bodybuilding forever. But behind that brilliance was a storm no one could see coming. His rise was meteoric, his ideas revolutionary, yet the very qualities that made him a legend would also push him toward a darkness he couldn't escape. Betrayal, obsession, and a collapse that shook the entire fitness world. This is the story of the man who tried to redefine strength, only to discover the real battle was never on the stage. Mike Mentzer's story didn't begin under the stage lights of a Mr. Olympia or inside a state-of-the-art training center. It began in a quiet, working-class neighborhood in Pennsylvania, where a skinny, fiercely curious kid started asking questions that most adults couldn't answer. While other boys his age were reading comic books, Mike was buried in anatomy charts and old training manuals, trying to understand not just how muscles grew, but why. He didn't just want to be strong, he wanted to know the logic behind strength itself. His childhood friends remembered him as intense, almost unnervingly focused. When they played sports, Mike wasn't satisfied with winning. He wanted to analyze the mechanics of every movement, wondering what tiny change could make someone faster, stronger, more efficient. He'd show up at school with notebooks filled with observations about lifting angles, muscle fiber recruitment, and human behavior, as if he was already preparing for a life that most people couldn't even imagine yet. By his late teens, Mike wasn't just lifting, he was transforming. His body grew rapidly, but his mind was evolving even faster. He devoured the works of philosophers like Ayn Rand, built a personal belief system around discipline and logic, and started shaping a training philosophy that blended raw intensity with scientific reasoning. Instead of copying the routines of the bodybuilding stars of the era, Mike questioned everything. Why were people training for hours? Why were they doing endless sets? Why was volume treated like a religion when no one could explain its purpose? Most athletes were chasing pumps. Mike was chasing truth. By his early 20s, he had turned himself into a machine built on precision. Every rep had intent, every set had purpose, and every workout looked like a controlled explosion. Brief, brutal, and so intense that other lifters sometimes stopped to stare. His approach shocked people, but it worked. His physique grew dense, carved, and powerful, in a way that didn't seem to follow the usual rules. Then came the defining moment that rocketed him into bodybuilding history. At the 1978 Mr. Universe, Mike Mentzer achieved what no one else had ever done, a perfect score of 300. Judges were stunned. Competitors were speechless. Fans felt like they were witnessing the birth of a new era. His physique wasn't just massive, it was balanced, symmetrical, and seemingly engineered according to some elite blueprint. People said he didn't look like a bodybuilder. He looked like what a bodybuilder was meant to be. The whispers began almost immediately. He's the future of the sport. He's going to change everything. He thinks differently and it shows. Mike wasn't just another rising star. He was a revolutionary mind trapped in the body of a champion. He brought philosophy into the gym, logic into training, and an almost scientific obsession into every decision he made. To many, he wasn't just lifting weights. He was rewriting the laws of bodybuilding in real time. But the sharper Mike's ideas became, the more they threatened the old hierarchy. The sport had traditions, unspoken rules, and giants who expected things to stay the same. And here was this young genius challenging all of it with nothing but reasoning, intensity, and a physique that proved he wasn't just talking. The spotlight loved him. The fans adored him. But somewhere in the shadows, resistance was building. Because brilliance, especially the kind that challenges the status quo, doesn't come without enemies. And that brilliance was about to collide with the sport's biggest ego. Long before the lights went up in Sydney and the judges lifted their scorecards, the friction between Mike Mentzer and Arnold Schwarzenegger had been building like a silent storm. Arnold, the undisputed king of the 70s, wasn't just a champion, he was a cultural force. He had the charm, the connections, the star power, and the kind of confidence that made people orbit around him. Even retired, he still walked into a room like he owned every inch of it. But Mike Mentzer was one of the few men who didn't bow to that gravity. He didn't care about charisma. He didn't care about politics. To Mike, bodybuilding was supposed to be a meritocracy judged on symmetry, mass, and conditioning, not personality or reputation. And that difference in worldview put him on a collision course with the biggest ego in the sport. Throughout the late 70s, the tension slowly bubbled. Arnold, even in retirement, still voiced opinions on who should win contests. Mike, on the other hand, was becoming the sport's rising intellectual force, someone who dared to challenge anyone, including Arnold, with cold logic and uncompromising honesty. Some pros said they admired Mike. Others said he was too intense, too blunt, too unwilling to play the politics that kept bodybuilding running smoothly. But everyone agreed on one thing. If Arnold ever came back, the whole sport would tilt in his direction. By the time the 1980 Olympia arrived in Sydney, that prediction became a chilling reality. Backstage, chaos ruled. Athletes expected a well-organized, tightly controlled event. Instead, they found confusion everywhere. Last-minute rule changes, unclear weight divisions, and judges whose decisions felt arbitrary. Competitors later said it was the most unprofessional atmosphere they had ever experienced. And then Arnold walked in. Some competitors said the temperature in the room changed. Mike, who had always refused to be starstruck, saw Arnold's unexpected return as a major red flag. For years, he had warned that bodybuilding was too vulnerable to influence, too controlled by personalities rather than principles. Seeing Arnold enter the contest out of retirement, unannounced, and allegedly underprepared, only confirmed what he feared most. The competitors' meeting became the flashpoint. Multiple witnesses later described a heated argument erupting between Mike and Arnold after Arnold questioned the validity of the weight class system. Mike defended the rules, insisting fairness demanded consistency. Arnold countered with sarcasm, belittling heavy duty and mocking Mike's rigid belief in structure. What began as a disagreement turned into a shouting match, so intense that several athletes stepped between them. Some claimed Arnold was provoking Mike on purpose, trying to crack his composure. Others believed it revealed a deeper rivalry, one between old-school charisma and a new era of intellect. Whatever the truth, the energy backstage shifted. Someone reportedly whispered, "If Arnold wants it, he'll get it," and the room fell into a kind of nervous silence. When showtime arrived, the contrast between the two men couldn't have been sharper. Mike walked on stage with granite density, sharp lines, overwhelming balance, and that unmistakable Mentzer intensity. Arnold, in contrast, looked far from his legendary best. His legs lacked the detail of his glory years. His midsection wasn't tight, and his overall shape seemed rushed like a man trying to conjure his past with only half the preparation. But when the final results were announced, the arena erupted in disbelief. Arnold Schwarzenegger, despite the visible flaws in his physique, was crowned Mr. Olympia. The reaction was instant and brutal. Some fans booed. Others yelled in anger. Competitors exchanged glances that said everything without a word. Frank Zane, Chris Dickerson, and Boyer Coe later hinted that the decision made no sense. One judge even admitted years later that he felt pressured, though he didn't specify by whom. For Mike Mentzer, it wasn't just a loss. It was an insult to the sport's integrity. He had always believed bodybuilding should be objective, clean, based on measurable criteria. Now he felt he had witnessed the exact opposite. A contest decided by influence, legacy, and celebrity, rather than muscle and symmetry. Witnesses described Mike storming out backstage, shaking with fury, his voice breaking as he told fellow competitors the sport was finished for him. Those who knew him well said something inside him snapped that night. He didn't just lose faith in judging. He lost faith in the entire system he had devoted his life to. From that moment on, Mike vowed never to compete again, and he kept that vow permanently. But the scars from that night went far deeper than a bad decision or a corrupt judging panel. Something darker began taking root inside him, something he would wrestle with for the rest of his life. But the battle didn't end on stage, it only triggered something deeper. When Mike Mentzer walked away from the stage after the 1980 Olympia, he wasn't just leaving a contest, he was turning his back on the entire world he had built his identity around. At his peak, with a physique that many believed could have dominated the next decade, he stepped away without hesitation. To him, staying would mean accepting a system he believed was broken, so he cut the cord completely. But Mike wasn't the type to fade quietly. Where other champions retreated into guest posing and endorsements, Mike threw his energy into something far more ambitious, proving once and for all that he wasn't just another competitor. He was a thinker, a visionary, a man determined to reshape bodybuilding from the inside out. Heavy duty became his obsession. It wasn't just a training system. It was his declaration of war on tradition. While mainstream bodybuilding worshipped high-volume training, marathon sessions with endless sets, Mike insisted the opposite was true. He argued that the human body grew best with short, brutal, all-out bursts followed by long periods of recovery. One set, maximum intensity. No fluff, no wasted time, no compromises. The fitness world didn't know what to do with him. Some lifters swore Mike opened their eyes. They trained shorter, grew faster, and came back thanking him for saving their progress. But others claimed he was too extreme, too stubborn, too convinced that he alone understood the truth. And as Mike became more vocal, the friction grew. His interviews sounded less like discussions and more like debates. He questioned legends. He challenged science. He called out magazines and dismissed coaches who refused to accept his data-driven approach. Mainstream bodybuilding pushed back hard. Some writers labeled him difficult. Others called him combative. A few went even further, accusing him of trying to tear down the very sport that once embraced him. But Mike wouldn't bend. He doubled down, sharpening heavy duty with mathematical precision, philosophical quotes, and arguments that made his critics uneasy. The more resistance he faced, the more he tightened his grip on his ideas. His standards grew harsher. His expectations grew higher, and his perfectionism, already intense, became almost unreachable. Friends said he reworked the same paragraphs for days, obsessed with choosing the perfect words. He'd write and rewrite training principles until they sounded like scientific laws carved in stone. On the outside, Mike looked like a genius refining his masterpiece. On the inside, the pressure was building. Every challenge to heavy duty felt personal. Every disagreement felt like an attack on his logic, his identity, his core beliefs. And the more he defended his system, the more isolated he became. People around him noticed the shift, an edge in his voice, a growing impatience, a sense that Mike was fighting battles most others didn't even understand were happening. Heavy duty wasn't just a training method anymore. It was his refuge. It was his shield. It was the last arena where he could still win. But at the same time, it became something else, a weight he couldn't put down. He had left bodybuilding to find clarity, but instead he found himself trapped between the brilliance of his mind and the expectations he set for himself. And each time he tried to perfect the system, fix another detail, or rewrite another chapter, a small piece of him slipped a little further away. Yet behind the certainty in his voice, something inside him was slipping. As the years passed, Mike Mentzer's world grew quieter and darker. To the public, he was still the sharp-tongued philosopher of bodybuilding, the man who spoke with absolute certainty and quoted Ayn Rand as easily as he discussed training mechanics. But behind the confident voice and iron logic, Mike was fighting battles no one could see. The insomnia came first. Friends said he could go days without real sleep, caught in a loop of overthinking and relentless analysis. He stayed up at night rewriting theories, correcting old notes, and challenging his own conclusions as if he were in a constant debate with himself. Lack of rest only amplified his intensity. His thoughts grew faster, heavier, harder to quiet. Then came the depression. To a man who built his identity on discipline and rationality, this was a battle he felt he should have been able to think his way out of. But depression doesn't follow logic. It crept in slowly, draining his energy, dulling his spark, and making every task feel heavier than the last. Some days he couldn't bring himself to write a single sentence. Others, he filled entire notebooks with ideas he would later tear apart, convinced they weren't good enough. Rumors began circulating, whispers that he occasionally leaned on stimulants to push through the exhaustion and keep his mind sharp. Nothing dramatic, nothing reckless, but enough to raise concern among the people close to him. They saw a genius running on fumes, chasing clarity in all the wrong ways. Isolation became his routine. Mike withdrew from public life, choosing instead to bury himself in philosophy and unfinished manuscripts. He believed he could create something groundbreaking, books that would reshape training forever. He sketched outlines, crafted chapters, and recorded long monologues filled with insight. But the perfectionism that once fueled him now held him hostage. Nothing was ever polished enough. Nothing sounded final. Every sentence demanded a better version. Project after project stalled. Manuscripts piled up, half written, half erased. Entire books he once promised the world never materialized. Each abandoned idea added weight to the growing sense that time was slipping away faster than he could control. Those around him noticed that conversations became unpredictable. One moment Mike was articulate and passionate. The next, he drifted into philosophical spirals, losing himself in concepts even he struggled to explain clearly. His brilliance had always made him different, but now that difference felt like distance. He was a man trying to rebuild logic on top of emotional fractures, a thinker whose internal world was becoming louder than the external one, a visionary who kept rewriting his future while barely holding on to his present. Yet even through the struggle, there were flashes of hope, moments when Mike seemed ready to move forward again, to reclaim the parts of himself he'd lost. He picked up new projects, connected with his brother Ray, and talked about finishing work he once abandoned. For a while, it looked like he might be climbing back towards stability, and just when it seemed he might rebuild, fate hit harder than any workout. By the late 1990s, the strain of years spent battling insomnia, depression, and relentless internal pressure was catching up with Mike Mentzer. His health, once powerful and resilient, began to show signs of wear. He felt the fatigue in ways he couldn't ignore anymore. Slower mornings, unpredictable energy crashes, and a heaviness in his chest that seemed to follow him everywhere. For a man who once sculpted himself into near perfection, the decline felt like an unwelcome reminder of time slipping through his fingers. Yet even as his health faltered, Mike poured himself into what mattered most: his work, his philosophy, and more importantly, his family. In those final months, he and his brother Ray grew closer than ever. They trained together, planned new projects, and leaned on each other through every high and low. Ray, a former Mr. America and accomplished bodybuilder in his own right, had been working toward a comeback. And Mike, despite his own struggles, threw himself into helping his brother prepare. Those who knew them said the Mentzer brothers were inseparable, linked not only by blood but by shared passion and shared pain. In the gym, Mike pushed Ray through training sessions, analyzing every rep, perfecting every angle. Outside the gym, they spoke for hours about life, philosophy, and the future they still hoped to build. It was one of the few things that brought light back into Mike's world, but his body was deteriorating faster than anyone realized. On June 10, 2001, the unthinkable happened. Mike Mentzer was found lifeless in his apartment, gone at just 49 years old. The cause was listed as heart complications, a quiet, sudden end to a life defined by intensity and brilliance. The bodybuilding world reacted with shock. Fans mourned the loss of a pioneer. Friends struggled to process how a man so driven, so sharp, so powerful could disappear without warning. But the tragedy was only half over. Just 2 days later, Mentzer, still grieving the loss of his brother, also passed away. His death, attributed to complications of his lifelong health issues, created a chilling mystery that still haunts bodybuilding history. Two brothers, bonded by blood and iron, gone within 48 hours. Some said it was a coincidence. Others whispered it was heartbreak. A few believed the brothers were so connected that one simply couldn't live without the other. Whatever the explanation, the effect was devastating. The sport didn't just lose two champions. It lost two minds, two innovators, two men who dared to challenge everything they were taught. It was a double tragedy that left fans asking questions the world will never fully answer. And in the aftermath, one truth lingered. Mike Mentzer's story didn't end with his final breath. If anything, the mystery only deepened. But even in death, one question echoed louder than all the debates. In the years since Mike Mentzer's death, his legacy has grown into something larger, more complicated, and far more powerful than even he might have imagined. To some, he was a genius, a visionary who saw the flaws in bodybuilding long before anyone else dared to acknowledge them. To others, he was a self-destroying perfectionist whose relentless pursuit of truth pushed him past the limits of his own mental and emotional strength. And somewhere between those two extremes lies the real story. A man who carried brilliance like a gift and a burden at the same time. Heavy duty, the philosophy he fought so hard to defend, didn't fade away after his passing. If anything, it spread even faster. Bodybuilders who dismissed him in the early days later admitted they'd underestimated him. Trainers built entire systems inspired by his theories. Modern strength coaches cite his principles without even realizing where they came from. The idea that shorter, more intense training could outperform endless hours in the gym became mainstream. And Mike was the spark that lit that fire. But his legacy isn't just about sets and reps. It's a cautionary tale about ambition, pressure, and the invisible battles that even the strongest people can lose. Mike's rise showed what brilliance looks like when it's nurtured. His decline showed what happens when the world becomes too heavy for one mind to carry alone. His life raises uncomfortable questions about the price of greatness. How much pressure can one person endure before it cracks the foundation they built their identity on? How far can a perfectionist push themselves before their own standards become a trap? And what happens when a man who insists on logic and control is confronted with a world that refuses to play by those rules? Then there's the question no one has ever been able to answer. The what if that hangs over his legacy like a shadow that refuses to lift. What if Mike had competed beyond 1980? What if judging had been fairer? What if his mind had been kinder to him? What if he'd lived long enough to finish the books everyone waited for? Some believe he could have been one of the greatest Mr. Olympias of all time. Others think his conservative training style might have extended his career and preserved his health. But the truth is, the world will never know. His potential sits frozen in time, sealed behind the decisions he made, the battles he fought, and the demons he never fully escaped. And yet, the impact remains. Even today, decades after his passing, Mike Mentzer's ideas still challenge lifters. His story still inspires newcomers. His philosophies still circulate in gyms around the world. And his name still sparks debates about ambition, truth, and the personal cost of chasing greatness with no plan to stop. He may not have won the 1980 Olympia, but he left something far more powerful behind, a legacy that refuses to be ignored. And as the pieces of his story fall into place, one final truth begins to take shape, leading us into the final chapter of his life's impact. Mike Mentzer's life reads like a blueprint drawn in extremes. He rose from a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood to become one of the most talked about minds the bodybuilding world had ever seen. His brilliance reshaped the sport, challenging long-held beliefs and forcing athletes to rethink what training could be. But that same brilliance carried him into conflict, with tradition, with icons, and eventually with himself. His withdrawal from competing, the internal battles that followed, and the tragic end he faced alongside his brother Ray created a story as powerful as any victory he ever earned on stage. Yet even through the collapse and heartbreak, Mike left behind a legacy that refuses to fade. Heavy duty remains one of the most influential training philosophies ever created. His interviews, writings, and ideas still spark debates today, and the mystery surrounding his life continues to draw new generations of lifters who see in him something rare, a man who wasn't afraid to question everything, no matter the cost. In the end, one question lingers above all the debates, controversies, and unanswered mysteries. Was Mike Mentzer destroyed by the sport, or by the impossible standards he built for himself? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was he a visionary ahead of his time, or a perfectionist who pushed himself too far? And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts. We've got more untold stories coming soon.